They gave the world unforgettable songs, but their own stories ended in heartbreak. Today, we look back at the tragic lives, final photos, and deaths of 10 legendary musicians. Michael Jackson was performing on national television at age 6. By 11, he was the lead singer of the Jackson 5, carrying a family of 10 on his voice, while his father stood in the wings, with a belt ready for anyone who missed a step. By the time he released Thriller in 1982, still the best-selling album in history, he had spent more of his life working than not, and he had never really had a childhood to look back on. He was born in Gary, Indiana in 1958, the seventh of 9 children, in a house so small that the boys shared a single bedroom. His father Joe ran rehearsals like military drills and beat the children when they made mistakes. Michael later said publicly that his father would hit them as hard as he could. He also said that performing was the only place he ever felt safe, that crowds and applause made sense to him in a way ordinary life never did. "I hate to admit it," he once said, "but I feel strange around everyday people." The fame that followed was unlike anything popular music had seen, but the scaffolding underneath it was always fragile. In 1984, while filming a Pepsi commercial, pyrotechnics caught his hair on fire and left serious burns on his scalp. The painkillers prescribed during his recovery began a dependency that deepened over the following decades. His appearance changed dramatically through the late 1980s and 1990s. Surgeries, vitiligo, the skin that grew progressively lighter, and the tabloids never let it rest. In 1993, a 13-year-old boy accused him of sexual abuse. Jackson settled the case out of court for a reported $23 million. A second set of criminal charges in 2003 went to trial. He was acquitted on all counts in 2005. But the years of proceedings had cost him his reputation in the eyes of much of the world, and roughly $400 million in legal fees and settlements had left him effectively bankrupt. By 2009, with Neverland lost and his finances in ruins, he agreed to a 50-show residency at London's O2 Arena, marketed as his comeback. It was called This Is It. People close to him said he was terrified and exhausted, barely sleeping, dependent on his personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, to administer nightly doses of propofol, a surgical anesthetic, just to get any rest at all. The last photograph was taken on June 24, 2009, during final rehearsals. He stepped on stage shortly after midnight, visibly exhausted, barely able to sing. He was due to fly to London in 8 days. He died the following afternoon, June 25, 2009. After Murray administered a fatal dose of propofol, he was 50. Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in 2011. Elvis Presley was born a twin. His brother Jesse Garin was delivered stillborn on January 8, 1935, 35 minutes before Elvis arrived. His mother Gladys wrapped the dead baby herself. Elvis grew up knowing he had come into the world alongside someone who didn't make it, and by most accounts, he never entirely stopped feeling that absence. He was born into genuine poverty in Tupelo, Mississippi. His father Vernon was convicted of check fraud when Elvis was 3 and sent to Parchman Farm prison, leaving Gladys to raise the boy alone. They lost their house while Vernon was inside. When the family eventually moved to Memphis, they lived in public housing. Elvis graduated high school and drove a truck. The idea that he would become the most famous entertainer on earth was not something anyone around him could have predicted. His mother was the center of his world. When she died of a heart attack in 1958 at 46, while Elvis was serving in the army in Germany, he was given emergency leave and wept publicly at her graveside. People who knew him said he was never quite the same afterward. He told a friend, "No one knows how lonely I get and how empty I really feel." That grief and the isolation that came with being Elvis Presley shaped the second half of his life entirely. Manager Colonel Tom Parker controlled his career with an iron grip, booking him into Vegas residencies and churning out film appearances long after Elvis had outgrown them. Elvis knew the work had become beneath him and that he had lost creative control, and it wore him down. He turned to food and to the prescription drugs his personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, supplied in staggering quantities. At one point, Nicopolis wrote Elvis over 300 prescriptions in a single year. 14 different drugs were found in his system at the time of death. Elvis did not think of himself as an addict. He once said, "You never hear Superman asking for help," and the people around him were too financially dependent on him to push back seriously. By the mid-1970s, his concerts had become painful to watch. He struggled to remember lyrics, his body bloated and swollen from years of drug use and poor health. His jumpsuits let out repeatedly to accommodate the weight gain. He told people privately he didn't feel well. The tour, scheduled for August 1977, had been booked regardless, and he didn't cancel it. On the night of August 15, 1977, Elvis left Graceland late for a dental appointment. A fan photographed him returning through the gates in his Stutz Blackhawk with his fiancée Ginger Alden and his 9-year-old daughter Lisa Marie. It is the last known photograph taken of him alive. The following afternoon, Ginger found him unresponsive on the bathroom floor. He was pronounced dead at 3:16 p.m. on August 16, 1977, of cardiac arrhythmia. He was 42. 75,000 people gathered outside Graceland in the August heat. He was buried on the property beside his mother. Whitney Houston had one of the greatest voices in recorded music, not one of the greatest female voices, one of the greatest voices, period. Rolling Stone ranked her second greatest singer of all time in 2023. She sold over 220 million records. She achieved 7 consecutive #1 hits on the Billboard Hot 100, a record that still stands. Behind all of it was a woman who told people privately that she had never felt comfortable being the person the industry needed her to be. She was born in Newark, New Jersey in 1963, into a family so saturated in gospel music that it was simply the air she breathed. Her mother, Sissy, was a Grammy-winning gospel singer. Her cousin was Dionne Warwick. Aretha Franklin was her godmother. She was singing in church before she was in school. When she was signed to Arista Records at 19 by Clive Davis, he shaped her into something specific, a mainstream pop sweetheart, polished and unthreatening. People close to her said she resented it, that she was a down-to-earth girl from New Jersey who had been dressed up and packaged for mass consumption, and that the strain of maintaining that persona for years was quietly corrosive. Her marriage to Bobby Brown in 1992 cracked the image publicly. What followed were years of tabloid coverage, visible decline, and a drug dependency that combined crack cocaine, marijuana, prescription pills, and alcohol in quantities that visibly destroyed her voice, the one thing that had been untouchable. She told Diane Sawyer in 2002 that she had partied her way through it and that it was done. It was not done. Multiple rehab stays through the 2000s didn't hold. Her father, John, who had once sued her for $100 million in a management dispute, died in 2003. Robin Crawford, her closest friend and the person many credited with keeping her grounded, had drifted away years earlier. Her daughter, Bobby Christina, grew up watching all of it. In 2009, she released I Look to You, her comeback album, and appeared to stabilize. By 2012, she was not stable. Friends noticed the signs. On February 9th, she was photographed leaving an event in Los Angeles, the last known image of her alive. 2 days later, on February 11, 2012, her assistant found her face down in the bathtub of her suite at the Beverly Hilton, hours before she was due to attend the Grammy Awards pre-party downstairs. She was 48. The coroner listed the cause as accidental drowning, with cocaine use and heart disease as contributing factors. 3 years later, her daughter Bobby Christina was found unconscious in a bathtub in eerily identical circumstances. She died 6 months later at 22. Freddie Mercury was born Farrokh Bulsara in Stonetown, Zanzibar in 1946, into a Parsi Indian family that sent him to boarding school in India at 7 years old. He was quiet, studious, and obsessed with music from an early age. The flamboyance came later, built deliberately, a performance of liberation that the shy boy from Zanzibar hid behind and eventually became. He arrived in England in 1964 with his family as political refugees, studied graphic design, sold clothes at a market stall, and found his way to Queen. By the mid-1970s, he was one of the most electrifying performers in rock history. The gap between the man on stage and the man off it never fully closed. Mercury was intensely private, gave almost no interviews, and guarded his personal life in a way that was almost paradoxical for someone who could hold 80,000 people in the palm of his hand. He told his long-term partner and closest friend, Mary Austin, about his sexuality in the mid-1970s. Their romantic relationship ended, but she remained the most constant person in his life and was with him at the end. He later left her the majority of his estate, telling her she was the only real friend he had. He received his HIV diagnosis in April 1987. He told almost no one. The band knew in broad terms that something was wrong, but respected his refusal to discuss it. When he finally sat down with Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon and said, "You probably know what's going on. I don't want to talk about it," they didn't push. Instead, they kept working, recording 2 more albums through the late 1980s and into 1991. Engineers on those final sessions described the atmosphere as strangely joyful. Mercury arriving in pain, recording what he could and saying, "I'll just sing it, and when I'm gone, you can finish it off." By the end, he could barely walk. One of his bones broke while he was being turned in bed. On November 23, 1991, he released a public statement confirming his diagnosis. He died the following afternoon, November 24th, of bronchial pneumonia brought on by AIDS. He was 45. His partner, Jim Hutton, was holding his hand. Mercury chose to hasten his death by stopping all medication 2 weeks earlier, taking only painkillers. His personal assistant said he decided when to die the same way he decided everything else, on his own terms. The last photographs were taken by Hutton at Garden Lodge on August 28, 1991, 3 months before his death. He was pale and drawn, and he knew it. He managed to smile for each of the 4 pictures anyway. Ray Charles Robinson was born in Albany, Georgia in 1930 and grew up in a shack in Greenville, Florida, where even by the standards of black poverty in the Depression-era South, his family was at the bottom. He said it himself in his autobiography. There was nothing between him and the bottom but dirt. What came out of that beginning? 12 Grammy Awards, a musical vocabulary that crossed soul, gospel, jazz, country, and R&B in ways no one had before, remains one of the most unlikely stories in American music. He was 5 years old when he watched his 4-year-old brother George drown in the wash tub their mother used to do laundry. He tried to pull him out and couldn't. Not long after, his eyesight began to fail, almost certainly from glaucoma, and by 7, he was completely blind. His mother, Aretha, fierce, unsentimental, and determined, refused to let him use his blindness as an excuse for anything. She made him haul water from the well, bring in firewood, do his own chores. When he fell, she let him get up. She enrolled him in the Florida School for the Deaf and Blind, where he learned to read and compose music in Braille and to play the clarinet, trumpet, saxophone, organ, and piano. Then, when he was 14, she died. His father had already been gone for years. Ray Charles was now an orphan, blind, 15 years old, and entirely on his own. He spent the next few years playing piano in clubs for $4 a night, living in borderline poverty, going days without food in his worst stretches. He also became addicted to heroin somewhere in those early years on the road, an addiction that lasted nearly 20 years and ran in parallel with a career that was revolutionizing American music. He was arrested 3 times. After the third in 1965 in Boston, he checked himself into a rehabilitation clinic and stopped. He replaced the heroin with gin and marijuana, which he used until the end of his life, and which eventually destroyed his liver. He fathered 12 children with 10 different women. He held a luncheon for all 12 of them in 2002 and told them he was dying. He placed $500,000 in trust for each child. His last album, Genius Loves Company, a collection of duets with Norah Jones, B.B. King, Elton John, Willie Nelson, Bonnie Raitt, and others, was recorded while he was already in serious decline and released 2 months after his death. It won 8 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year. The last photographs show a man who looks utterly spent, hollowed out, the body finally giving way after 7 decades of everything he had put it through. He died at his home in Beverly Hills on June 10, 2004, of acute liver disease. He was 73. Buddy Holly's entire recording career lasted less than 2 years. In that time, he wrote and recorded enough music to influence almost every major rock act that came after him. John Lennon and Paul McCartney both cited him as a primary influence. McCartney later bought the publishing rights to his entire catalog. The Beatles named themselves partly in tribute to his band, the Crickets. All of that came from a shy, bespectacled kid from Lubbock, Texas, who was 22 years old when he died in a cornfield in Iowa in the middle of the night. He was born Charles Hardin Holly in 1936, the youngest of 4 children. His family was musical in the way that working-class Southern families sometimes were: church, radio, and whatever instruments came to hand. He taught himself guitar as a boy, played country and western as a teenager, and saw Elvis Presley perform in 1955, which shifted everything. By 1957, That'll Be the Day was a #1 hit on both sides of the Atlantic. He followed it immediately with Peggy Sue, Oh Boy, Rave On, and Not Fade Away. He was recording at a pace that most artists don't sustain over a decade. He had also just married Maria Elena Santiago, and unknown to almost anyone, she was pregnant. In the winter of 1958-59, Holly was broke. A split with his band, the Crickets, had left him without his main revenue stream, and he owed back taxes. He signed on for the Winter Dance Party, 24 shows in 24 cities across the frozen Midwest, scheduled so poorly that the acts were sometimes driving 300 miles overnight in a converted school bus with a broken heating system. Temperatures dropped to -35 degrees Fahrenheit. By the halfway point, drummer Carl Bunch had been hospitalized with frostbitten feet. After the show at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa, on February 2nd, Holly had had enough of the bus. He chartered a 4-seat Beechcraft Bonanza to fly to the next venue in Moorhead, Minnesota, partly to do laundry and get some sleep before the show. His bandmate Waylon Jennings gave up his seat to the flu-ridden Big Bopper. Before they left, Holly told Jennings, "I hope your bus freezes up again." Jennings replied, joking, "I hope your plane crashes." He said it haunted him for the rest of his life. The plane took off just after midnight into a blinding snowstorm. The 21-year-old pilot was not certified for instrument-only flying. The investigation later concluded he likely misread the newly installed gyroscope, believing the plane was climbing when it was descending. It hit a cornfield 5 miles from the airport at close to 170 miles per hour. All 4 died on impact. The wreckage was not found until the following morning. The last known photograph was taken hours earlier by 16-year-old attendee Mary Gerber during that final performance at the Surf Ballroom. He died on February 3, 1959. He was 22. His wife, Maria Elena, miscarried after receiving the news. Jimi Hendrix taught himself to play guitar on a single-string ukulele he found in a pile of junk. By the time he was 27, he had been named the greatest guitarist who ever lived, a title he still holds. In between, he survived a childhood that would have broken most people and a music industry that tried to own everything he created. He was born James Marshall Hendrix in Seattle in 1942. His parents fought constantly and eventually separated. His mother, Lucille, who he adored, died of a ruptured spleen when he was 15, and his father refused to let him and his brother attend her funeral. Hendrix turned to the guitar afterward with an almost desperate focus, teaching himself by ear, skipping school, eventually stealing a car, and enlisting in the Army to avoid jail time. After a parachute injury ended his military service, He spent years playing backup guitar for Little Richard, Sam Cooke, and Jackie Wilson for almost nothing, sleeping on floors, waiting for something to change. It changed in 1966 when he was discovered in New York and brought to London. Within a year, he was the most talked-about musician in the world. The Experience's first 3 albums remain among the most innovative records ever made. His performance of the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock in 1969, alone on stage with a Stratocaster, turning the national anthem into a document of the war, is still one of the most discussed 3 minutes in rock history. But the machinery around him was corrupt from the start. His manager, Michael Jeffrey, had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on him and was siphoning money from concert revenues. A recording contract dispute was due in the High Court the following week. A paternity suit was pending. By September 1970, Hendrix was exhausted, barely sleeping, dealing with the flu, and telling friends he couldn't focus long enough to write songs. On the night of September 17th, he left a voicemail for his former manager that ended with the words, "I need help bad, man." Then he went back to his girlfriend Monica Danemon's apartment in Notting Hill, took 9 of her Vesperax sleeping pills, 18 times the recommended dose, and did not wake up. The last photographs taken by Danemon on September 17th show him the day before his death. He died on September 18th, 1970, of asphyxiation at the age of 27. He had been a household name for 4 years. David Bowie was born in Brixton in 1947, the second child of a barmaid and a charity worker who divorced when he was young. His half-brother Terry, 12 years older, was the most formative relationship of his early life. It was Terry who introduced him to jazz, to beat literature, and to a way of seeing the world that the Brixton Council estate didn't offer. Terry was also schizophrenic and spent much of his adult life in and out of Cane Hill Asylum. Bowie watched that deterioration up close for decades, always quietly afraid that the same thing might happen to him. Several of his mother's sisters had also developed serious mental illness. He once said it was the fear that drove him to build so many alter egos that if he disappeared into a character, whatever was underneath couldn't crack. In the mid-1970s, the cocaine nearly finished him before the fear could. Living in Los Angeles in a house he barely left, eating almost nothing, sleeping in fits, convinced his swimming pool was a vessel for witchcraft rituals, Bowie later said he had almost no memory of the Thin White Duke period. He relocated to Berlin in 1977 specifically to escape, renting a flat above a hardware store with Iggy Pop, cycling to the Hansa Studios each day, rebuilding from scratch. What emerged from that recovery was the Berlin trilogy, Low, Heroes, and Lodger, 3 albums that are still considered among the most influential records in rock history. Terry died by suicide in 1985, lying down on the railway tracks near Cane Hill. Bowie did not attend the funeral. He sent a card with a single flower and the words, "You've seen more things than we could imagine, but all these moments will be lost, like tears washed away by the rain." His relationship with Terry's memory never resolved. He was diagnosed with liver cancer in mid-2014 and told almost no one. He spent 18 months recording his final album, Black Star, with musicians who signed non-disclosure agreements. His producer Tony Visconti understood what was happening and told him, "You canny bastard, you're writing a farewell album." Bowie didn't deny it. Black Star was released on January 8, 2016, his 69th birthday. He died 2 days later. The last known photograph was taken on that birthday, January 8th, smiling and cheerful, 2 days from the end. His producer said his death, like everything else, was a work of art. John Lennon was born on October 9, 1940 in Liverpool during a German air raid. His father Alfred was a merchant seaman who was absent for most of his childhood and eventually disappeared entirely. His mother Julia, warm and musical and utterly unsuited to conventional motherhood, gave him up to be raised by her sister Mimi when he was 5. He later said he lost his mother twice, once when she handed him over, and again when she was struck and killed by a car on July 15, 1958. just as he had begun to reconnect with her. He was 17. Paul McCartney, who had lost his own mother to cancer the year before, later said that shared loss was the bedrock of everything they made together. The losses accumulated. His uncle and surrogate father George died when Lennon was 14. His closest art school friend Stuart Sutcliffe, who had joined the early Beatles as bassist, died of a brain hemorrhage in Hamburg in 1962 at 21. His manager Brian Epstein, who had believed in the band before anyone else did, died of a barbiturate overdose in 1967. McCartney once said that Lennon was left with a deep-running paranoia that people died when he was around. What came out of all that damage was some of the most important music of the 20th century. The Beatles changed popular culture in ways that are still being traced. Lennon's solo work after the breakup, Plastic Ono Band, Imagine, was rawer and more personal than almost anything the Beatles had allowed him. He underwent primal scream therapy in 1970, specifically to excavate the childhood grief he had been carrying for decades and put the results directly onto record. Mother, the album opener, ends with him screaming for his parents repeatedly as the track fades. It is not comfortable to listen to. His private life was more complicated than the peace and love image suggested. He was physically violent with his first wife Cynthia and largely absent as a father to his son Julian, who spent years publicly describing the experience of being abandoned by him. Lennon was aware of it. Toward the end of his life, he devoted himself to raising his second son, Sean, trying, as he put it, to do it right this time. By December 1980, he was 40, newly productive after 5 years of near silence and preparing to tour. On the afternoon of December 8th, he signed a copy of Double Fantasy for a fan outside the Dakota. The fan was Mark David Chapman. Later that night, as Lennon returned home, Chapman shot him 4 times in the back. He was pronounced dead at Roosevelt Hospital at 11:07 p.m. Rolling Stone named Aretha Franklin the greatest singer of all time. Not the greatest female singer, the greatest singer, full stop. She won 18 Grammy Awards, sang at the inaugurations of 3 presidents, and performed at the funerals of Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. She was also a woman who had her first child at 12 years old and spent most of her adult life fighting to be seen as more than the pain she had survived. She was born in Memphis in 1942 and raised in Detroit, where her father, C.L. Franklin, was one of the most prominent Baptist ministers in America. Her mother, Barbara, left the family when Aretha was 6 and died of a heart attack 4 years later. Aretha was 10. She never fully recovered from it. Music became the way she processed what words couldn't reach. She was playing gospel piano by ear as a small child, unable to tolerate formal lessons, developing by instinct what teachers couldn't have given her. At 12, she gave birth to her first son. At 14, a second. She returned to school both times and eventually dropped out at 16 to pursue music full-time. Her first marriage to Ted White in 1961 was to a man who became her manager and beat her. Her sister Carolyn later said that during those years, Franklin was drinking so heavily they thought she was on the verge of a breakdown. She walked away from the marriage in 1969 and slowly rebuilt. It was during this period that Atlantic Records and producer Jerry Wexler found the key, recording her live in the studio, gospel style, with her playing her own piano. What came out in 1967 was Respect, followed by a string of recordings that changed American music permanently. The losses continued through the decades in ways that never made the front pages. Her sister Carolyn died of breast cancer at 43 in 1988. Her brother and longtime manager Cecil died of a heart attack the following year at 49. Her father had been shot by burglars during a robbery in 1979 and spent 5 years in a coma before dying in 1984. Franklin never spoke publicly about what that period cost her. In 2010, she had surgery for an undisclosed tumor, which was later confirmed to be pancreatic cancer. She kept working through it for 8 years, refusing to discuss her diagnosis publicly. She performed at the Elton John AIDS Foundation Gala in New York in November 2017, one of her last public appearances. She died at her home in Detroit on August 16, 2018, of advanced pancreatic neuroendocrine cancer. She was 76. The last known public photograph was taken at that November 2017 performance, 9 months before she died. She was on stage. It's where she always looked most like herself.